Hello, Ksenia. Thanks so much for joining us today. So for those of our audience who don't know you already, would you please just start by introducing yourself and what you do?
Excellent, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be talking to you today. My name is Ksenia. I'm Ksenia Grant. I'm the Director for Ecosystem and Partnerships at the Center for Finance, Innovation and Technology, which is CFIT.
And for those people who don't know CFIT, now I'm obsessed with CFIT because I'm obsessed with fintech. But just to set a little bit of a scene for CFIT, for people who aren't necessarily in fintech or financial services, Ksenia, how would you describe it? I know that's quite difficult, but in a sentence, but give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's an innovation center for growing innovation, developing innovation in financial services sector. We're working with financial services, with large companies, with fintechs, with policymakers, with third sector, with academia. So bringing all the great minds together for the benefit of the UK, for growing innovation in the sector and the economic development in the UK.
Super. Thank you very much. Right. So let's get on to you and what you do. So what have you learned about the UK's fintech clusters and ecosystems so far in your role as Director of Ecosystems and Partnerships, Ksenia?
Yes, I mean, both in my role currently and I think in a previous experience working in one of the clusters in Scotland specifically, I think, from that experience working in the sector and also kind of looking at this wider than UK, it's really important to understand that clusters as such are really regional networks that help grow regions and nations and help economic development of those localities and help growth and innovation of the sector. So just to kind of understand it, because I think it's a term that is being used and not necessarily maybe everyone knows what's meant by that. And I think there are a variety of different factors that make clusters successful, and that has changed as well over the last decades. If you think about different clusters, industry clusters in a variety of places around the world, I think initially it's always been seen as a cluster being a kind of a hub between academia, between government, I mean, between corporate. It's very traditional, that kind of network of those activities, obviously strategic focus and so on and so forth. I think in the last decade or so, we know that this is not enough for the cluster to grow, and that needs to, apart from those three elements, we need kind of 5 parties. So apart from those 3, we also need the entrepreneurs, the companies, the startup environment, and we need the capital, so the investors. So that kind of becomes a cluster or helps growing the cluster. And a successful cluster has got all those elements in place, and they're all very closely connected and interwoven. So I think that's worth mentioning. And in what I've learned around the fintech clusters around the UK is that they all have grown very differently. We obviously have the London as being the kind of very main central cluster for fintech and FS because of the very essential financial services sector there. But we have a variety of clusters across the UK, and Khalifa Review identified 10 of them. All of them develop slightly differently, and all of them have slightly more formal or informal arrangements around those 4 or 5. And then again, in every region, all 5 are so prominent as we would maybe like to see for a very successful cluster to grow and develop further. So I think that's maybe important to say. And each of those clusters in the UK is slightly different, has got different strengths and has different success stories and different weaknesses. So it's important to say they're all very different and they've developed differently and sometimes very organically.
So there's room for more because obviously, as you know, the project, the FinTech Cluster project here is about working out what a FinTech cluster based around Norwich and Norfolk could and might look like. So just because Khalifa identified 10, does not mean that there cannot and should not be a lot more, I guess, is what you would be saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after all, like, this is all about the financial services and fintech sector in the UK, and we all, those different regions, part of the UK. So, wherever the region is based is helping develop that sector and the growth of it nationally. So definitely there is space for more. then, you know, I think this is more really now for the particular regions to figuring out what is important for them and being very strategic around their focus going forward. And I think, you know, if you're, and as is this case, like you are guys kind of looking at this being slightly new players maybe in that space, and not new because I know it could be feeling maybe something a little bit offensive because you have had activity in the region that is strong. But if you're kind of not being recognized or haven't been recognized in the Khalifa review, you may feel a bit like, oh, you know, how do we then move forward? And I guess my advice would be very strategic about it and think about what kind of cluster you want to become and what you want to be known for. And really, you know, aim high, but start small and really have a detailed plan of how you go about it. And that's from, you know, where you want to grow and how different you're going to be to those clusters, because you're not necessarily, and none of the clusters are going to be in another London overnight, right?
Yes.
But maybe there is no need for another London, then maybe there is a need for specific expertise that doesn't exist in other parts of the UK or is not very prominent, that you can bring something that is very unique to you that is not necessarily available elsewhere. So I will focus on that unique selling point and being really developing of where you see there is a gap across the UK and where there your region can be a hub for that activity going forward. And I know it can be a little bit daunting as well when you know you are a new player, and maybe this is a slightly different comparison, but if I think about Europe and tech clusters, if you think about some of the Baltic states, like Estonia and Latvia, you know, who are looking into becoming more of in a tech space, you know, when they announced that, everyone is thinking, right, you know, like we won't be going there. It's Germany, it's UK, and so on. And now everyone is going to that part of the world to learn from them about how they grow their startup ecosystem and tech ecosystem and invite people from around the world. So, you know, I think it's not being necessarily too bothered about what's happening with those big guys or big clusters. You're seeing how you can grow your own unique selling point and become competitive in your own way.
That's such good advice. Thank you so much, Ksenia. And so what's on your agenda then as Ksenia, and also I guess a little bit as CFIT? You've just put the first coalition, the first working group on open finance, got that, I was going to say to bed. I mean, that's making it sound like it's finished, but it's not. But that bit of work for CFIT's done. So what's next, Ksenia, in 2024?
Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we've literally just finished the first coalition. So we announced the results of it and the kind of outcomes, recommendations. That's Open Finance Coalition. But as you say, this is not the end of it as such. So the coalition itself has completed because we need them to be town bound, and it's not something that kind of goes on forever. And our, in our case, 60 plus partners don't know when and they will be required over what period of time and so on. So we had to have kind of time bound kind of parameters to it. But nevertheless, there is an appetite for continuing that work. So we are looking at phase 2 of that work, and that won't be a coalition in itself, but it may be continuation of some work. We're looking specifically at some of the recommendations. At the moment, we're particularly seeing a lot of interest in CFIT continuing the work on the recommendation around commercial model for open finance, recognizing that the setup really needs to be driven by the industry and decided with the players in that space. So we're looking at kind of how we can take that recommendation forward. And we also had a lot of interest in taking forward our proof of concepts. They've been receiving a lot of positive feedback, so we are looking into how some of that work can be taken forward. So that's kind of open finance, I guess, continuing some elements of that. Obviously, going forward, we're also going to be announcing a second coalition in 2024, so watch the space. And beyond that, obviously within my role as well, which is kind of quite wider on partnerships and development, we are looking into partnering with a variety of stakeholders going forward, and also actually our own funding model. So we are funded by the UK Treasury, which and the City of London Corporation, which is great. But we have to look into 2025 and think about how we will continue as an organization going forward. So a lot of my focus will be around the model and looking at the space within this very vibrant ecosystem and see what model would be additive, will be helpful for both the ecosystem and ourselves as an organization to see obviously how we can continue that work that we've started last year, really. So that's kind of a lot of the focus for 2024 for me and the organization.
Well, thank you very much, Ksenia. We're very nearly out of time, actually. It goes very quickly, doesn't it? So I guess the final question, if you could give a piece of advice to the people that are going to be thinking about what is the research and the work that they've been doing on working out that fintech cluster idea proposition for Norwich and Norfolk. If you had one piece of advice to give to those people, what would it be, Ksenia?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I mean, obviously we talked about those different elements already, and the focus on deciding your unique selling point, unique focus area, how you differentiate. But beyond that, I think I would also think about how you would plan that work going forward, and really having those champions from your ecosystem and outside that will work with you going forward on developing that cluster, because those are really important. And at that early stage, more than I think than in some of the future stages, you need someone who is very visionary and very passionate about it to take this work forward and to galvanize others around it. So I would maybe one would be, you already might know who those people are, you might have inkling of who might be, but I would really then keep them very close and work very closely with them going forward to make sure they can take the work forward, and it will become reality, because it's something that it takes time. In every situation takes time, and therefore you need the right people to kind of take it forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ksenia.
No, it's a pleasure to talk to you.